All right, in lesson 38, we're going to talk about what ratios are, and we're going to talk about how we use ratios to set up what's called a proportion. Now, we've already had, or you've already had, ratios in the past. For example, say that in the NFL, say that there's 32 teams, and say that 3 out of the teams, 3 out of the 32, have purple in their uniform. So we would say that the ratio of teams in the NFL that have purple to the total teams would be 3 to 32. So what we're saying then is that the ratio of teams that have purple to the total teams is 3 to 32. So 3 teams out of the 32 have purple in their uniform. Now we could also look at this a little different way. So if 3 teams have purple, how many teams do not have purple in their uniform? Well, you take 32 minus the 3, and we'd say 29. Now, what's this ratio saying? What's this ratio comparing? Well, it's comparing teams that have purple in their uniform to teams that don't. So all a ratio is it's really a fraction, and it's comparing one thing to another. All right, let's take a look at example 1. Now, in example 1, it says the ratio of Celtics to Nets in the crowd, or in other words, in the stands, was 7 to 2. Now, let's take a look at what this part means, 7 to 2. So if I write that ratio as a fraction, 7 represents how many Celtics there were in the crowd, and 2 represents how many Nets there were. So let's see, I'm going to write that down. So 7 represents the Celtics, and 2 represents the Nets. And this is a ratio because obviously in the crowd we're going to have more than, just 7 Celtics and 2 Nets, or in other words, a total of 9 people here. But all it is, it's just comparing one to another as a fraction in lowest terms. So for every 7 Celtics, there's 2 Nets in the crowd. Now it goes on to say how many Nets were there. It goes on to say actually if there were 714 Celtics, how many Nets were there. So I'm actually going to erase this so I have a little bit more room. And then I'll write the ratio again. So we have 7 to 2. Now, if we know that there's 714 Celtics, now I got to make sure that I write the other part of this ratio the correct way. Now 714 has to go on the top because here 7 representing the Celtics was on the top. I got to have the 2 sides of my equal sign have to be balanced. So on the left side it's Celtics to Nets. On the right side it's got to be Celtics to N Nets because the problem is asking how many Nets were there. Now you might have had a little experience with this in the past. Now we're going to solve this, and we solve this for n by using what we call cross multiplying. And in cross multiplication, it's called cross multiplication because we multiply these two together. And I'll show that. So we have 7 times n, or 7n, is equal to, and then I'm going to multiply these two together. 2 times 714. Now, when I take, so let's figure out what 714 times 2 is. So I got 8, 2, and 14. So 7n is equal to 1,428. Now, let's solve it for n. They're multiplying by 7, so divide by 7. And if you took your calculator or worked that paper and pencil, we would find out that the answer is 204. So, if there's 714 Celtics in the crowd, then that means that there's 204 Nets in the crowd. And that makes sense because there's a lot more Celtics. The number of Celtics actually is more than 3 times the number of Nets, and that makes sense with the numbers that were given. All right, let's take a look at one more example. It says the crowd at the game were made up of Tiger fans and of Mustang fans in the ratio of 5 to 9. So let's see, 5 to 9. And the order is the same as the order of the sentence. So Tigers to Mustangs, 5 to 9. So for every 5 Tigers, there were 9 Mustangs. All right, it goes on to say if there's 18,000 Mustangs. Now, I'm going to set up what's called a proportion, which is two equal ratios. So if there's 18,000 Mustangs, now where's the 18,000 go? Does it go up on top or does it go on the bottom? And the reason I mark these back here is so I remember which number represents Tigers and which one represents Mustangs. So the bottom is the Mustangs, so the 18,000 goes on the bottom, and it goes on to say how many Tigers there were in the crowd. All right, so let's cross multiply. So 9 times T. I like to multiply the two that have the letter in it first. So 9 times T equals 5 times 18,000. Now let's figure out what 5 times 18,000 is. Well, 5 times 18 is 90, and then we'll add 3 zeros. So 9T equals 90,000. Now they're multiplying by 9, divide by 9, so T then is equal to 10,000. So in the crowd then there were 10,000 Tiger fans. So as you can see, we've talked about ratios, and then we've used two ratios to make up a proportion. And then to solve the proportion, we use what we call cross multiplication.